I Am Become Death, The Manhattan Project, What It Cost, and The Final Test. What was the Manhattan Project? Between the years of 1942 and 1945, the U.S. government maintained a research project that produced the first atomic bombs. This is the story of that project. The first important thing to note that we won't dig into until we speak on who was and wasn't involved with the project is that the Manhattan Project began in 1938 with Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann's discovery of nuclear fission, after which Einstein and Leo Szilard warned Roosevelt that Germany may start attempting to build an atomic bomb. Atomic Heritage Foundation 2017. It was during the summer of 1939 Albert Einstein was persuaded to present to Franklin D. Roosevelt the military potential of an uncontrolled fission chain reaction. During February of 1940, $6,000 was given to start research, and on December 6, 1941, the project was put under the Office of Scientific Research and Development. After the United States entered World War II, the War Department had joint responsibility of the project. June of 1942 was when the Corps of Engineers were assigned management of construction work. And due to the fact that much of the early research was done at Columbia University in Manhattan, the project was named after the Manhattan Engineer District. Corps of Engineer districts are named after the city in which they are located. September 1942 was when the Brigadier General Leslie R. Groves was placed in charge of Army activities, and Manhattan Project became the code name for the research that would eventually extend across the country. Other scientists, including the Germans and British, were working on similar projects exploring the problem of creating the atomic bomb. There was even a cooperative effort made between the United States, Great Britain, and Canada, where many of their scientists joined in on the project. Making explosive materials suitable for use in an actual weapon was incredibly difficult and would undoubtedly take several lines of research and development simultaneously. The main fissionable component of the bomb was uranium-235, which cannot be separated from its companion uranium-238 chemically, so scientists had to develop physical means. This required complex facilities and large amounts of electricity. Only one method was developed for fissionable plutonium-239 production. In December 1942, Enrico Fermi was the first one to finally succeed in producing and controlling a fission chain reaction in the transmutation in a reactor pile of uranium-238. Before 1943, the function and design of an atomic bomb were theoretical. It was within that year that the laboratory under the direction of J. Robert Oppenheimer was opened in Los Alamos, New Mexico. By 1945, enough plutonium-239 was available, and the weapon's development and design were far enough along to prompt an actual field test. At this point, the original $6,000 allocated to research had grown to $2 billion. That's about $5.95 for every person in the United States in 2025. The editors of Encyclopedia Britannica, 2018. The Trinity Test. The name for the detonation of the first atomic bomb was the Trinity Test. The test occurred on July 16, 1945 at 5:29 and 45 seconds a.m. The bomb was a plutonium implosion device called Gadget and was exploded at the airbase of Alamogordo just south of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Forgive me if I say any of these city names wrong. Many locations were considered for the first testing site, but it wasn't until J. Robert Oppenheimer suggested Los Alamos that the site was chosen. Oppenheimer also coined the term for the test when he called the site Trinity in reference to John Donne's Holy Sonnets. The base of the tower from which the bomb was to be dropped was designated Ground Zero. This term came to mean the center point of a typically catastrophic event. The desert where the bomb dropped within a radius of 800 yards, or about 731.52 meters, was fused to glass. After the bomb dropped, the site was closed and signs that warned of radioactivity were posted surrounding it. For years, the site was off limits, but by 1953, most of the radioactivity had dissipated, and in September of that year, the public was allowed to visit. In 1975, the National Park Service designated the Trinity site as a historic landmark, which covers 80 square miles, about 2.4 times the size of Manhattan. Public tours have been held on the first Saturday in April and the third Saturday in October, but in 2024 they scaled back and only the October tour is held. Radiation levels are elevated, but visits are still considered safe for short durations. 1 hour at ground zero will expose visitors to about 1/2 millirem of radiation. For comparison, the article provides the information that a coast to coast flight would expose a person to about 1 millirem. Most of the trinitite, glass formed from the explosion, was removed or buried, though small samples can be found. It is prohibited to remove them from the site. Spires and Ray, 2025. Who was involved and who wasn't? Manhattan Project scientists include Hans Bethe, the theoretical physics leader, Albert Einstein, the relativity pioneer, Enrico Fermi, nuclear reactor pioneer, Richard Feynman, quantum electrodynamic pioneer, Klaus Fuchs, probably said that wrong, Soviet atomic spy, Glenn T. Seaborg, plutonium chemist, Robert Serber, Los Alamos lecturer, Leo Szilard, chain reaction theorist, Edward Teller, hydrogen bomb proponent, and perhaps the most well-known, J. Robert Oppenheimer. All of these scientists I have named so far have biographies/articles about them in correlation to the Manhattan Project on the same source, National Park Service 2023. Furthermore, James Chadwick was the neutron discoverer, James Franck was the photoelectric effect researcher, Joseph Rotblat was the nuclear disarmament advocate, Eugene Wigner was the reactor design expert, Herbert York was the defense research leader. The rest of the scientists I have listed, including many of the ones previously, also have articles on them on this source, U.S. Department of Energy, Office of History and Heritage Resources, no date. This is obviously not a complete list of all involved, but rather the most notable. There's another person who I'd like to note whose research and efforts helped pave the way for this project, who chose not to be involved with it. Her name is Lise Meitner. I talked about her in the writing/video Influential Women in History. Lise Meitner is most known for her work in nuclear physics. It was alongside her nephew Otto Frisch that she helped discover the characteristics of nuclear fission. In 1966, she shared the Enrico Fermi Award with Otto Hahn and Franz Strassmann for their combined research, which led to the discovery of uranium fission. Following her schooling, she joined Hahn in researching radioactivity. During World War II, she escaped Nazi Germany in the summer of 1938 as she was Jewish. After this point, Meitner and Hahn found the physical characteristics of the division. In 1939, they proposed that the name is fission for this process. In 1944, Hahn received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for discovering nuclear fission. Many have argued that Meitner deserved to share that award. It was during that time that Meitner was invited to work on the Manhattan Project. However, she opposed the atomic bomb and rejected the offer. When she passed in 1968, her gravestone read, "A physicist who never lost her humanity." Later, the chemical element meitnerium was named in her honor, the editors of Encyclopedia Britannica 2019. While I understand for the most part the purposes behind developing science, I cannot help but wildly respect Meitner for her commitment to ethics and for paving the way for future STEM endeavors. Most of the scientists advocated against the use of the atom bomb. Leo Szilard even formed a petition to President Truman against the use of the weapon in war. Szilard, 1945. Meitner was the only one with the restraint to say that she wouldn't help develop it. What did it cost? The Trinity test was top secret, and the Manhattan Project leaders did not inform those living nearby. So, what happened to them? One of the miscalculations that was made was that scientists believed that the site's generally low winds would contribute to the limiting of the spread of radiation. And while the aim was secrecy, the blast from the bomb was visible up to 160 miles away. Witnesses in Albuquerque and El Paso described a huge fireball in the mushroom cloud. While few people lived in the surrounding desert, there were some ranchers that lived 13 miles from the test site. There were tens of thousands of people living within 50 miles of the site. These people were not informed of the tests until after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because they chose to prioritize secrecy, the Manhattan Project leaders eventually decided not to evacuate the area because they were worried it would heighten suspicion or cause panic. What's worse is that many of these people thought that the world was literally ending. Today, we would know immediately what happened if we saw the cloud from our backyard, but you must keep in mind this is the first time an atomic bomb had ever been tested. These people had no idea what was happening, and therefore likely no understanding of the potential concerns of radiation. Only 3 pounds of plutonium were necessary for fission reaction, but the scientists loaded Gadget with 13 pounds. They knew it would cause large amounts of fallout, but the pattern of fallout was much less certain. Fallout spread to the northeast over an area of about 250 miles long and 200 miles wide. Scientists were even able to track part of the fallout pattern as far as the Atlantic Ocean. After Trinity, tactics changed. The military began timing explosions in the air to reduce the dispersal of fallout, but radiation landed on vegetables, cattle, and contaminated the water supply in New Mexico. In rural New Mexico, many people lacked running water and would collect rainwater off of their roofs, and most locals grew their own food and raised livestock for meat. Eating food with high levels of radiation has been linked to cancer and birth defects. Scientists purchased some of the most severely burned cattle to study the effects of radiation, but the scientists chose not to collect any data on civilian exposure as they were worried about the panic it might cause. What this meant is that even after the residents found out about the testing of an atomic bomb nearby, they couldn't understand how severe radiation exposure could be. Following the Trinity test, people in nearby counties began to report health issues. Things like heart disease, leukemia, and other cancers appeared in families with no prior history. The people who reported these circumstances later became known as downwinders. Unfortunately, access to medical care is sporadic at best for those living in rural or impoverished areas. And without local health care, those living downwind of the Tularosa Basin had to travel long distances to see doctors. Many struggled to afford medical care and, due to illness, became unable to work. And in the eyes of any potential employers, the people's health issues became pre existing conditions which could and did prevent them from other job opportunities. There's a group pursuing recognition under the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, RECA, of 1990. It was at the urging of scientists that the government finally banned atmospheric tests in 1963, and the U.S. Senate anonymously voted for January 27th to be designated as the National Day of Remembrance for Downwinders, but this designation only recognizes those who were impacted from the Nevada test site. Ryerson 2024. To say that the people nearby were robbed of living normal lives is an understatement. Future generations were lost as within months the infant mortality rate increased by 56% due to so many rare birth defects. Cancer rates rose, and chromosomal abnormalities made it so that cancer was more likely in the following generations. Downwinders who were born long after the Trinity test still faced high rates of cancer, and yet at the time of the source articles 2019 to 2024, Jula Rosa was not included in the caretaking agreements under RECA. Campaign News 2019. As of 2025, those in the state of New Mexico for 1 year between September 24, 1944 and November 6, 1962, that develop specified compensable diseases can receive a lump sum of $100,000. If the afflicted has passed, their survivors may apply for equal shares of the single payment. This revision to RECA came in 2025, Civil Division, U.S. Department of Justice, 2014. Now, not to belittle this historic development, but what does that really mean for those affected? The update doesn't cover medical expenses, it is just a one time payment. Medical bills are absurd, and there isn't an accurate estimate of costs with so many different types of cancer. However, the estimates for leukemia are $47,264 for initial care, $12,701 for continuing care, and $169,588 for end of life care. City of Hope Editors 2023. Not to mention, there won't be enough time to get everyone enrolled that needs to be under RECA's 2 year expansion. The people of New Mexico realize that it is a big win for them to be recognized and included under RECA. However, the efforts the government had made to ignore them over 80 years have impacted communities severely. ProCop 2025. There were children that thought the ash falling from the sky was snow and went out to play in it, pressing it into their faces. Only one of those children had survived to pass on that story. Meta et al. 2024. It's a step in the right direction, but many of the afflicted were too sick to hold jobs. There isn't an accurate number of those who lost their lives, especially as the concerns of nuclear fallout health risks were initially ignored near the testing site. Little 2023. There are things people will never be able to atone for, but making life livable for those impacted would be a good start. Origins of I Am Become Death. A lot of people quote Oppenheimer's recitation of the line, I am become death, destroyer of worlds, but few know where the line stems from. In fact, finding the information separate from Oppenheimer online is nearly impossible. Either way, the line's origins are from the Bhagavad Gita, which is an ancient Sanskrit text and a part of the Mahabharata. Probably said that wrong, I apologize. One of the longest epic poems in the world. In the poem, Prince Arjuna has a conversation with Krishna, who is an incarnated definition, embodiment, or representation of a deity or spirit in human form, version of the god Vishnu. Arjuna is struggling with the ethics of war, and within the conversation, Krishna convinces Arjuna that it is his job to fight. What is essentially the height of the story is when Arjuna asks Krishna to show his true self. What unfolds is a revelation involving many arms. Arjuna begs Krishna to end the carnage. Parallels are to be drawn between the ancient texts and the atomic bomb scientists. Oppenheimer also wrote about the Trinity test by referring to Prometheus and referred to Alfred Nobel and this useless hope that their power of their tools might end wars through mutually assured destruction. PAC 2023. Unfortunately, the things we do cannot be taken back, and like I mentioned previously, there are things I think we cannot atone for in this lifetime. I'm certain these scientists spent a lot of time thinking, or I should hope that they did, on the ethics of the thing they were trying to do, slash what they were trying to create. The issue is, it probably weighed more heavily on their mind that the Nazis may get a hold of the tool before they did, and that could mean worse things. But if they had contemplated more closely on what they were doing, they would have been more careful with the people they were testing next to. That isn't to say that they would have let everybody in on military secrets, but they'd come up with some other reason to evacuate. They couldn't have known how poorly it would have ended, but they had an idea. They just cared more about other things. Everybody just cares more about other things, and the vulnerable masses get left and disposed of. The final test. This is where I'm going to dive into my personal thoughts surrounding the topic. As always, I love to hear your thoughts, but let's keep it civil. You don't have to agree with me to have a conversation, but you do have to be respectful because I will not respond to disrespect. I think the idea of mutually assured destruction holds a lot of weight or truth about our society. I think the final test for many is to be capable of violence and not use it, whether that is due to actual restraint or the looming threat of greater social rejection, it doesn't matter. I think unfortunately that is why we can never destroy evil. Part of the equation is that a lot of people end up building a cage that keeps them stuck in the cycle of violence. The other part is that we do not control karma or karmic balance. I think to some degree, when you work so hard to destroy evil, you end up adding to the problem and becoming the thing you sought to change. If you kill a murderer, the number of murderers in the world stays the same. I know that's from a meme, but it adds to the point. That isn't to say that intention is useless, but rather that the world and the universe are so vast that our impact often isn't what we think it is. Evil will continue to exist whether we try to stop it or not, and I think in many ways the best option is to live as authentically as possible and try to spread kindness in small ways every day. I also think this ties into why people find it romantic when you lay down the weapons and turn away from violence. Believe it or not, most of the women I have interacted with also tend to share this sentiment. I think a lot of people find sensuality in a person choosing to turn away from their violent ways because what most people truly want is peace. I think it can be confusing or feel silly to admit wanting something so simple as contentment. When you go from being used to drastic highs and lows, wanting something calm, peaceful, balanced, and or content feels like not aiming high enough. People are aiming to always be happy, and I think there's a major flaw going unaddressed in that. Being happy, much like being sad or angry, is a relatively fast moving emotion. Happiness is heavy, not necessarily in a bad way, but simply that you cannot hold on to it forever. When you chase a fast moving emotion, it's always going to escape you faster than you can reach it and move more the longer you try to hold it. Being content is finding satisfaction in what you have. It is the foundation that we build this sense of well being upon. Much like drinking energy drinks to get the energy now, we end up needing to up the ante every achievement, and over time, our response to the item isn't as receptive. For metaphorical purposes, I maintain further opinions on how we need certain things like energy drinks or certain forms of escapism to simply subsist, definition, maintain, or support oneself, especially at a minimal level, within a society that commodifies us, but that seems a little complex and off topic here. It's funny because when you say to somebody to fall in love with the process, we're almost entirely ignoring the fact that the process is where we are finding our excitement already. It's true though, when you finally realize that the journey is the fun part, you stop waiting for some invisible marker to tell you that you succeeded. Your sense of success is inside you, and your foundation is built upon that. Your emotions and sense of self are less shakable when they're built from something more stable. I got off topic, I think. The basic premise is that the topic of good versus evil is always going to raise serious ethical concerns, and in doing so, it prompts a lot of different conversations. I don't think the tools we create are the issue, I think we are. Not literally we as in humans. I think bad people are always going to find new ways to do bad things, and I think we cannot stop bad things from happening by fighting directly against them. I think the way we fight bad things from happening is giving our communities power and sovereignty. By power, I don't mean like rising to a revolution, but rather giving people voices, making sure everyone's fed, that we all have a safe place to rest our head, and so on. Allowing people to feel at peace, fully content, and more is a step towards maintaining balance. Things aren't always going to be good, just like they aren't always going to be bad. But when we shift our focus towards building a safe and calm environment, something changes in the world. Again, you don't have to agree with me, my 2 cents are mine, and everybody is going to think the world should be run differently. In fact, it would be boring and there'd be a lot of blind spots if we all thought the same way. Regardless, thank you for taking the time to sit in on my thoughts. It feels special. Thank you so much for being here. If you're a fan of investigative journalism and philosophy, you can subscribe for free today. If you would really like to support my writing, you can subscribe to my Patreon, which helps me cover research materials, i.e., purchasing text, as well as my time and effort in development. Along with that, it supports my efforts to keep education free and widespread. I thank you for your support, no matter the form. Also, my references will be in the Patreon and Substack links in the description, just different formatting of the same writing, references at the end. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!